Thank you so much, Penny Kelly, for joining us. And your book, New Worlds of Energy, Consciousness and Energy, Volume 2, which is quite a read. I have to say, it's incredible. And I'm so happy that I've been able to meet you as well in person at Contact in the Desert in Joshua Tree this year in California. And thank you so much for writing this book, and I look forward to reading also Volume 1 and Volume 3. And thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to talk to you, of course, for many, many hours, and I hope that we'll get a chance to speak about other subjects as well. But today, if we can speak especially about your work with Dr. William Levengood, and also all of the research you have done around consciousness, and especially in the area of the crop circles and what you call the plasma field. So thank you so much for joining us. I know you're way on the other side of the country, I believe, today. We're calling you from Woodstock, New York.
Okay. I'm only in Michigan, so I'm
not
too
that far away.
Yeah, so it's good to be here. Thank you for having me. It's this is a time for me that is I think people are finally hearing about Levengood's work, and I really like that.
So Levengood, unfortunately, has left the planet, and I believe you worked with him for quite a few years with all of his work. Could you give us just a brief summary of the work that you did with him?
Brief summary. Okay, I'll do my best there. We started out I was kind of a subject in the lab because I have some unusual abilities, and he was looking for people who had unusual abilities. He wanted to test them to see if he could figure out what was this strange new energy that he had discovered coming from people and plants and everything, animals, water, even stones, etc. And so that was how we met. I went into the lab, he tested me, we started to talk, and I think he had read my first book, The Evolving Human, and he had some questions about that. And as we chatted, he said that there had been a remarkable statement in that book, and I said, well, what was that? And he said that that space, or that mind, was the awareness property of space, and that just got us going, and kept us going for 15 years. He eventually read some of my other books. He said, "Oh my, you have an amazing ability to take very complex things and make them understandable to people." And then he asked me to write about his work because he was having trouble getting published. And so I said no for a couple years. And then and the reason I said no was because I didn't think my science was good enough. And he said, "Well, come on, I'll teach you." And so I entered into a mentorship program, and that mentorship program was phenomenal. For the next 12 years, I learned just a lot about physics, biophysics, plasma physics, astrophysics, and all the theory, and lots of stuff about chemistry, and the focus in all of this was that he was studying crop circle materials, and materials from the soil and the plants that had been taken from around bovine excisions, also known as animal mutilations, and UFO landing sites. And he had been doing research into seeds and plants for, probably 35, 40 years. at that point. And what happened over the course of the 15 years that we worked together was that the work he had done all of his life began to dovetail with what he was seeing from crop circles with plants and materials that came from crop circles. And he eventually defined what is a crop circle and how does it form, and what is an animal mutilation and how is it done, and he was very, very comfortable with UFO materials and felt that there were other dimensions of existence and other beings from other dimensions who knew how to use energies in ways that we were what he called kindergartners. And so that is pretty much a summation of what we focused on. I was, of course, always interested in consciousness, and he was always interested in the science aspect of things. And it wasn't until probably, I'm going to say, 10 years into the relationship that we had with one another that it really began to change, and he began to see and understand the science of consciousness, and so I think that in the end we were trading back and forth. We became partners instead of subject and scientist, and that partnership was very fruitful, and now that he's gone, I really miss that part of my life. I need a new scientist, so to speak. So that's a summary of what we worked on.
And when you first met him, Penny, you said that you went there because of your own special skills. What were those particular talents that he was interested in that you had?
Well,
or still have, I assume.
I do. What I had, I'm not even sure I could describe that, Susie, because, or give it a name, because it hasn't been researched that much. But what Levengood had discovered a form of energy that he called CDP. It stood for Charge Density Pulses. And he discovered that this energy was emanating and could be tracked, and it could be boosted or could be stopped or could be affected in many, many different ways. But he didn't know what this energy was. It just was, emanating from everything. And so he wanted to see what my CDP was doing. And there was a characteristic signature that almost everything produced. And I remember going in. I walked into the lab. This was the first time I ever met this man. And he didn't even say hi. He just said, "Could you hold these things for a minute?" And he pushed these two aluminum, they were like two aluminum pieces of metal. They were round like a stick, about an inch in diameter and about 4 or 5 inches long. And they had some wires coming out of the end, and they were attached to the chart recorder. And so I held those two aluminum, he called them charge collectors, and he turned on the chart recorder, and after a few minutes he made some noise, and the noise was kind of like, And then he turned it off, and he said, let's test again in a few minutes. And did that. So he made a couple of tests, and I said to him, "So what are you testing?" And he said, "Well, I'm looking at what is your energy doing." And he said, "I've never seen anybody with this amount of control over their energy. You are not wasting one drop of energy." And I said, "Oh," and because I had a little bit of science background and had started out to be an engineer, we just started talking, and I was very, very interested in the science, in the procedures, in all of that. And I had there were two of us, maybe three of us, over the years in the lab who had the ability to change the energy of other things, and for that to be a measurable change. We had the ability to affect the signal on the chart recorder and to, without being hooked up to the chart recorder at all, from 100 miles away, to be able to produce a massive signal that, by all rights, the chart recorder should have been tracing out a straight line. And it bounced all over. And it just was that kind of thing, that energy that he was tracking. Eventually, 10, 12 years later, we realized it was plasma. And so CDP, charge density pulses, became charge density plasma, and we proceeded then to experiment and explore. And what we discovered through a series of experiments in the lab was that that consciousness directly affects plasma, and that everything was made of plasma, everything. People, plants, animals, trees, birds, stones, everything. And when we realized that consciousness affected plasma, he had already postulated that he had observed that if you disturbed the plasma, it would reorganize itself as if it had a mind of its own. And when somebody was deliberately impacting that plasma, it would react and would respond, and it would reorganize itself again, perhaps differently. If it gained sufficient energies, it would reorganize permanently. In other words, if you were trying to heal somebody and you could pour in enough consciousness, it would allow that plasma, it would boost that plasma's energy enough to permanently restore itself and reorganize. And so those were some of the things that we discovered in the lab and were experimenting with. And, just little things like if you're an independent system and you're just standing in the middle of the room and somebody, and your energy is being traced out on the chart recorder, then you'll have a certain amount of energy that, that's your signature. If somebody directs energy, or even more amazing is if somebody touches you, just touches your shoulder, puts, a couple fingers on your shoulder. You don't move, you don't respond, you don't do anything, but the energy on the chart recorder just goes berserk. It's just, we are so interconnected, and we so deeply affect one another. So, some of the hands-on healing work became clear that is extremely powerful. And the more that we worked with plasma, the more we studied plasma, and the more I understood, the more awed I became. It was like, OMG, this is some amazing stuff. And it was the plasma in plants or in soil or in seeds or in water that was changed when there was a crop circle. It was the plasma in trees and soil that was affected when there was a UFO landing or a UFO site. And it was the plasma around an animal who had been mutilated that showed signs of this tremendous boost in energy. And often the number of transactions going on in that grass or that soil or that water would be so tremendous. It would be clear that the plants were trying to save themselves. And once in a while they did, but often they could not keep up with the number of transactions was indicative of how much damage had been done by the sudden increase in energy. And so the plant, the grass, the soil, whatever it was, had this tremendous number of transactions in which it was trying to produce, antioxidants to repair and restore itself. And sometimes it would do that, and if it was beyond a certain number of transactions in the redox formulations, then the plant would not survive. It would be dead within a few days. Other times, plants were hit by that energy. They absorbed that. They reorganized themselves, and you could put them in the closet in a box in the dark for a couple of weeks and take them out, and they were bright green and growing like they'd been out in the sun and in the rain for the last 3 weeks. So
that was an amazing story that you told in the book. Yes, that was fascinating. So
yeah.
If I can just come back to plasma, and Penny, I actually have a school called the Art of Energetic Healing School, and I teach a year-long course in New York and in upstate New York. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and so, of course, I'm always looking for the science, for the hardcore science to teach, to instruct during these classes, because, as we all know, anyone that's had a hands-on healing, whether it's remote, as in I'm in Australia and you're in Holland, we've had the experience of feeling different after having a healing session. And what's been so interesting is in some of the first classes, it's a year-long class. So in the very first classes, I do some experiments where people are, and there are all sorts of people, lawyers and doctors and people that are changing professions, and then very young people who are just starting out and want to become a healer. All sorts of different people come to this class with very, very radically different backgrounds. And so we start with this experiment where we do several positions, several different types of positions of hands on the body, where you're on the body physically, you're off the body, where you're visualizing color or visualizing a particular type of healed event or healing event. We just go through all these different ways. And what's interesting is the position that the people experience as the deepest healing, whether they're doing the work or receiving the work, is when the person is sitting away from them, next to them or on the other side of the room, and the only thing they're doing is just connecting to them with their heart, just love to love, simply love to love. And so I'm wondering, like when we speak about plasma, and I've heard it called the fourth state of matter after solid, liquid, and gas. And not being a scientist myself, but from what I understand, that's when the electrons are in a free state. They're not tied to the nucleus of the atom. Is that right?
No, not really. I think.
So could you give us a description of plasma?
Okay. So my favorite description is one that I've used before, but I'll say it again. It's a visual, and then I'll try to give it a little more scientific basis, okay? So the first thing I would say is...
this because is this what if we connect intentionally to the plasma field, is that where we can do the deepest work? That's why I'm asking this question, of course.
Yes, and that's where energy healing starts and ends. It's within the plasma. And so there's a couple things I would say about plasma. The first thing is that plasma is the basis of matter. So whatever's going on in the plasma is going to be displayed, so to speak, in the body or in the plant or in the tree or, whatever the form is. So plasma there's a priority of operation or priority of formation, and the plasma is when, a field begins to form. And in fact, a plasma is a house of fields. And all these fields are in very specific relationship to one another. These fields are electromagnetic in nature. They have one end taking in information and one end giving off information. And they are in very specific relationships, and you can imagine it. You've seen some magnetic filings or some iron filings on a piece of paper, and you pass a magnet underneath that paper, and all the filings will follow the magnet. And if you just, put the magnet or lay the paper over the magnet, the filings all form at the two ends of the magnet, and you get this, beautiful array or display of what looks like, I'm not even sure what to call it, like these little lines of filings that go from the top to the bottom of the magnet, okay? Let's assume that this magnet is maybe 2,000 Gauss, and it's 3 inches long and maybe a half inch in diameter, and there's a north pole and a south pole. The one end is what we call the magnetic end, and the other end is the gravitational end. And literally, gravity is, that force which pulls things to itself, and magnetics is literally that which expresses or distributes. And so you have these iron filings on this paper, and if you move the magnet or you bring in another magnet, the filings all change position. And that is basically what a house of fields looks like. You've got all these magnetic fields following what's called lines of force, and they're all in relationship. If you move one of those magnets the tiniest bit, there's a shift in all of the filings. And that is exactly how the human body is constructed. There are all of these molecules, or particles, let's make it particles, and they are held in place. They're actually given off by these various fields, and if you change the fields within that human body, you change the organization and the interactions between and among all of the particles. Sometimes it's a good change and the organism works better. Sometimes it's not a good change and the organism doesn't work better. It stops communicating. The foot doesn't know what the hip is doing, and the hip doesn't know what the heart is doing, and the heart has no idea what the fingernail is doing. And so the system begins to disintegrate. It's no longer a working, integrated whole system. And that's what disease is. And so what we have in plasma is that plasma is the basis of the human body. It's a bunch of force fields. It's all plasma fields. And if you change one single dynamic in the relationship among those fields, you change all of the dynamics in that particular body. And if that, and the other thing is that in a particular area of the body, so let's get a little more complex here. Now, the heart has its own plasma field. The liver has its own plasma field. The stomach has its own. Every single part of the body has its own plasma field. And if you, let's say you ruin the field, the house of fields that actually holds and constructs the liver, then the liver is going to stop working. If you do that to the heart, then the heart's going to stop working. If you do that to the skin has difficulty, or the eyes, or whatever it is. Each part of the body has its own kind of plasma signature, and when you want to do healing, you reset that signature back to its original condition, its original relationships and set of frequencies, and voila, you have healing.
And you do that with intention, correct? With the intention of your consciousness.
You can do that with Million things. You can certainly do it with intention and consciousness, and that's something that I have done many times. You can do it with food because food has certain frequencies in it, mostly from the minerals. So your minerals in your food are extremely important, and those minerals we take in, we really don't want the minerals. We want the frequency of the minerals. We really don't want all the other stuff. I mean, our tongue does. We like the taste of certain things. Let's say a peach. A peach has all of these frequency sets within it, and we want those frequencies because they will, if you eat enough peaches, gradually, just by being in close proximity, you get this communication that starts up, and you get this resonance that happens. And resonance means that two different frequencies begin to be the same frequency. One alters a little bit, the other alters a little bit, and pretty soon, what you have is just one frequency resonance. And so that's how healing happens. You can do that with consciousness. You have to have a lot of emotional punch behind that. You have to care deeply. I tell people, get upset. I know that sounds very counter to the spiritual movement that's out there, but a lot of the spiritual movement stuff is garbage, a lot of it, and it's not helpful. I mean, people end up feeling that maybe they're a little nicer, but they're also just as unreal as a lot of religions leave you. And so it's like, okay, but that's a different subject. Hang on, Susie, let me get a drink here. Okay. So so what you get or what you want to envision is either, well, let me say it this way. You want to envision this house of fields. Your body is a house of fields, and all of these fields work together. They communicate, and then you want to maybe think of it or envision it also as a flock of birds that are flying in perfect unison, as if it's all one mind. And, they twirl and they twist and they fly and they dip and they swirl without anybody running into anybody else. And, no mistakes. And sometimes they split and fly in two directions and come back together again, just, like they're doing this magical dance. And that is very similar to the kind of one-mindedness that particles have, that particles actually communicate, and they, they work together, and you can communicate with them and ask them to work together better, or if it's a bacteria that you don't want, to stop working. Most bacteria are really pretty good, but they're in the wrong place. And so asking them to return to the proper place, strep and staph bacteria belong in your gut. That's where they do the work of breaking down the carbon-based materials that you eat. They don't belong on, in a cut on your skin. They don't belong, in your throat or, any of those kinds of places. So sometimes you can ask them to return to, and just let them know that they're being destructive. They're so exuberant. Everything is so full of life that, certain things don't always recognize that they're causing destruction. And when you communicate with them and simply tell them, you're causing an awful lot of destruction, would you please, stop? I'm asking you to move. I'm asking you to, leave that area. They will often do that just because they are so cooperative, and they're so.
Penny, the same would be, for example, with a cancerous tumor or some sort of growth. You could make the command or request to your own body to say, we need to
Yes.
stop creating this tumor now. I'd like you to dissolve.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and come
And
back to
if
vital
you
health.
have some sort of tool that will produce a frequency reset for that area, the tumor just is erased in a minute. It's gone. It doesn't exist. You have to have the plasma in position to hold the form of the cancer or the form of the congenital disease or the, whatever it is that you're dealing with. And so I think we're entering into an era of plasma, of energy healing, in which energy healing is going to come into its own. It's finally going to be understood. It's going to be utilized. It's going to be developed. And I think we're going to look back on the days in which we did, the surgery and the cut and burn and the chemicals and go, oh, my God, what were we thinking? So
that's already what I'm thinking. As a homeopath and as an energetic healer, it's absolutely where I'm thinking already. So when you say tools, so I think of hands-on healing or just basically use of intentional consciousness. And with all of my clients, I always ask everybody to step into that place in their mind and in their heart where they are in command, literally. And and then we use homeopathy, and I completely agree with nutritional therapy or just eating, just eating good food, of course. Yeah. And what are some of the other tools that you see? I have had a lot of experience also with Rife machines, and what are some of the other tools that you see as those resets for the plasma field?
Well, to speak to that, I'm going to say two things. One is the tools of the future that I have seen are just phenomenal, and breath. In the meantime, breath is a very powerful tool. And the third thing is the eyes. The eyes have two blue rays coming out of them, and if you can fix your eyes on somebody who's got a problem, let's say they're across the room, and they've got a heart problem, you fix your eyes on their heart, and you have the intention of correcting that heart. Maybe they've got myocarditis or something. And those eyes are incredibly powerful tools because they are beams of light. They are beams of light that literally affect the plasma themselves. We did another series of experiments in the lab in which there was a thing of water, a box or a carton of water. It was plastic and just had water, and it was maybe 5 inches high by 5 inches wide by 8 or 9 inches long. And just by running my eyes over that water, or in a petri dish, same thing, and run it in a clockwise direction or in a counterclockwise direction or in the direction or the pattern of an infinity symbol or a zigzag or whatever. Every different move or motion of those eyeballs, no thought, just the eyeballs moving, was enough to generate a totally different signature of the plasma in that water. That water was feeling and responding to those beams of light coming out of the eyes. So the eyes are a major tool. Yeah. And the breath
with the gaze, if you are sitting across the room from someone with a heart condition and you are with the intention of healing, you're saying you don't even need to connect with your heart or with your thoughts, but just the gaze of the eyes. And so if you're intending to do a so-called healing, are your eyes still, or do you need to trace one of the symbols?
You can trace the symbols or you cannot. But my own personal, attitude, idea, whatever, is that you use everything. So if you want to effect a healing, You use your eyes. You use your heart. You envision the symbols. You can, there's all kinds of things. You use your own breath. The thing that is important to understand is that we are already connected. And if you can't use all of it, use what you can. And we are so attuned to one another that, it's a beautiful, beautiful truth that is slowly emerging from this research that says, oh, okay, just putting a hand on somebody for a second, sliding your hand over their shoulder, patting them on the shoulder with the intention of healing that person sometimes is enough. Right there. Boom. It's done. So, so the eyes, the gaze, as you call it, very, very powerful. The breath is also incredibly powerful. There have been some things I've done with breath that are just, it's like, oh, well, why aren't we all using breath? Breath
yes.
is, if you have targeted conscious breath going into the body and you have linked yourself to another body before you start this process, you will both heal. And then the third set of tools actually comes from my third book, Robes. The Little Men in Brown Robes actually took me into the future where I saw some amazing healing tools. One of them being a mirror that you stand in front of, and it illuminates your entire aura, and you examine your light field, they called it, every day in the same way that you brush your teeth, because any problem is going to show up in that field of light long before it shows up in the body, and it can be corrected much easier, much faster, without any suffering. And then if somebody did actually get into a serious problem, every individual had a template, a set of templates, and you would lay on this table, and your bottom template would be underneath you, and then your top template would be over you, and it would be held in place by a framework, and then they would turn something on, turn on these lights and frequencies, and these lights and frequencies would drill down into your body, shifting and correcting any problems anywhere in the body. And then later, other tools that were developed that were even beyond that were gadgets that could sense any spot. You would have your frequency set monitored from the time of birth, so your base frequency was pretty well known, and especially between the ages of like 12 and 16, when you were at your peak in terms of everything working pretty well. And people were amazingly healthy, are amazingly healthy in the future. But if something, if you got into a problem, there were these gadgets who could take your initial frequency and reproject that to you, or they could scan your body and see what was out of alignment with the frequency matrix pattern that you had at 14 or 16 or, whatever age, and then they would correct that and reset you to that. And so, and so now we have the work of Marin Kesh, who's already doing some of that work in Italy, and it's
actually so fascinating. The when I am working with the master teachers, these beings that I channel with the Galactic Federation of Light, they take me again to places that I'm not sure we would call it the future, but they're places that are definitely of a more advanced technology or consciousness understanding, and they always show me that it's frequency and light, which really light is frequency, right? And
that's right.
they've given me initiations into healing fields, which I actually do in public, where we get together as a large group, and we create an etheric temple, a healing temple, and it's literally like I'm sure somebody like you would absolutely be able to see it. There's like a very elaborate cathedral of light that is created in the room. And I believe that these benevolent brothers and sisters, our star brothers and sisters, are there with us, and many of people see it. And then one by one, people come and lay on the table, and I go into what I would call a very deep trance state, where I then, and it's exactly as you said, these two plates. I literally see like a template underneath and above the body as they're lying down, and it's kind of like a computer board, or an electricity board, and on that level, which is like almost a foot above and beneath the body, my hands are being moved with their help into it's almost like I'm sewing or doing something like on a circuit board, and then I can see how the energy and the lights go into their body and shift into those fields, which I'm guessing now you would call those as plasma fields. And it seems to me as a very futuristic way of working, and it's very horizontal. It's interesting. It's all on the horizontal part of the body, and then often I'll have to crawl underneath the table and do it underneath them as well. And some of the students from the Healing Temple who work with me, because I'm not really looking at that time, I'm just kind of doing my job and working, they will say that there are, very large amounts of light and different colors and different things. They can see organs moving. And we've had tremendous results with people with stage 4 cancer going away and things like that. And I also have to say, just in terms of the breath work, within the circle of healers that I work with, one of the ladies was working specifically with breath work with, again, a stage 4 cancer lady who had done radiation as well. And through the breath work, she became so-called, we say, cancer-free at this point. So all of these techniques are I also see them. They're coming into our future. They are available to us. And I wanted to ask you, as we segue into crop circles, do you believe that the crop circles are also some form of healing or consciousness raising for the planet?
Yes, and much more than that. The planet is a living being, and I think we have been out of touch with our mother for a long, long time. Mother Earth, Mother Nature, those used to be very central concepts and very central consciousnesses in our lives. And we lost that connection, and I think it's coming back slowly, very slowly, and people are getting it. But the crop circle, the planet herself, is one of millions of planets in our solar system, or in our, not our solar system, in our galaxy and in our universe. And those beings, planetary beings, communicate. And they tell one another what's happening, and they do that using mostly digital information, a series of pulses, et cetera, et cetera. Most of those are mathematical in nature, and they, in the crop circles themselves, I think that when the planet is giving off, there are certain areas. I think crop circles are the chakras of our planet. Those chakras, or those areas, those crop circles, form again and again in the same area, because the planet is either taking in information from out in the galaxy, or she's giving it off. And the crop circles appear in different places because those are places where information is being taken in or being given off. And that pulsation giving off that, that kind of energy is picked up by other planets and other beings, and we have not recognized, I think we're beginning to, but we have not recognized that the Earth is a living being and that she has a consciousness, and she's deeply affected by our consciousness. And so we have a lot to relearn, I guess would be what I would say. A lot.
And who do you see as the makers of the crop circles? Is that the plasma fields of Mother Earth herself, or?
It's a combination of the plasma fields of Mother Earth and the atmosphere. And when I say the atmosphere, I mean the greater atmosphere. Many, many times, for instance, you would get samples from a crop circle, and it would contain a whole bunch of iron oxide, or I forget what we called it, the specific name, but there would be, a certain number of parts per million of that particular element that would be common in the soil. And in crop circles, there would be 400 times that amount in the crop circle. And it became clear that that was coming from or being sucked in from outer space or from within the atmosphere and the outer atmosphere as well, and that, that certain magnetic or gravitational forces were at work, vortex forces were at work, and so you get a whole bunch of one element in a particular place. And that usually was coming from, off the planet. I know that there's a lot of people who have said, well, it's, what about the face, the alien face, and what about the message or the response that we got from the crop circle that was in response to a message that we sent out something like 20 years earlier. And it's like, yes. The planet is not just communicating with other planets, she's communicating with other beings, and that includes us. So when you get a group of people who go over to England, for instance, and they sit up on the hill and they say to the planet, or they say to the air, or they don't really know who they're talking with, they just say, we would like to see a crop circle that, is in this shape, and they draw the shape on a piece of paper, and then they meditate on that. The Earth is listening, and so she's going to produce that as a recognition. I hear you. You're my people. I'm listening. What else do you want? And the communication stops there. We don't follow through, and so the communication isn't going very far, very fast at this time. But I think over time, as we renew our connections with Mother Earth and with nature and animals and plants and bugs, that we will begin to communicate and to have astounding results, because we did used to communicate with all those things, and it was a recognition. If you go back to I think when the Europeans went into Africa and came to America and they met the indigenous peoples, they made fun of those peoples, and they immediately sent missionaries to quote unquote correct those people, because they needed to be educated. They were following all these gods and praying to all these gods and blah blah blah. And what those indigenous people were actually doing was communicating with the consciousness, the plasma, within that plant or that tree or that animal, literally communicating with it and asking for something because they needed something. And that plant or animal or tree or whatever would communicate back. And we have lost the ability to hear the other intelligences on the planet. And, we've erased or tried to erase the idea of the gods that were honored by the indigenous people. And all they were really doing was communicating with everything in our world, because that was how the world worked. And when the Christian missionaries came to some of the indigenous peoples over in the Far East, and even in Eastern Europe, they the people said, "Oh my God, we can't be doing this because the world will not work right. They need us. The weather needed to know where was rain needed, where was sun needed. It was a case of everybody communicating with our planet, and it was this gigantic relationship, and all done with a great deal of consciousness. And we have lost that, and we started destroying, and we're still destroying, although there are people who are saying, stop, that's enough. We can't be doing that anymore. And it is crazy for us to be destroying our home and to be poisoning ourselves. I'm like, okay, how dumb is that? But we have to realize that other things are intelligent, they're conscious, they can be communicated with, and they will respond. And they will respond sometimes in ways that just are mind-boggling. Absolutely beautiful. And a cancer is one of them. And you've just, said you had experiences of having a woman be cancer-free just, because something was breathing in and communicating with her. So, or with it. And so I think we have a ways to go, and I see a lot of signs of that waking up process. And I love the work you're doing. We need a lot more like
Penny,
that.
Are the crop makers, the circle makers, just so I understand clearly what you're saying, are you saying that they are not from what we would call ET origins? You're saying it is from Earth only?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Right. Okay.
So
you're
here's
saying it is Mother Earth.
It is Mother Earth and her relationship with us and the rest of the cosmos. And those are the kinds of signals that they send between and among one another. So let me make two quick points.
Yes.
We have this brain that we have, this amazing brain, and they say, oh gosh, we're only using 5 or 10% of that brain. No, we are not. The rest of the brain is communicating with the rest of the cosmos. Do we need to know that in our everyday? No, not really, not unless something comes up and we need to know. But that doesn't mean it's sitting idle doing nothing. It is, we are in communication with everybody on the planet and everything on the planet. And I think that's very important to recognize. And we need to begin developing and training ourselves to pay attention to those communications and to trust those communications. Because if we ever needed to do some communicating without our cell phones or our telephones or our satellite systems, we'd be in a bad way because we haven't developed ourselves, and we need to develop ourselves much further. And so
Mother Earth is communicating to us with these symbols, and these symbols are, or with these images, with these mathematical formulas, with these sacred geometries, and we can only really see them in full if we are above them. Correct? If we're very high above them.
Yes, that's true. But seeing is not the only form of experience. You can also walk in those crop circles and have phenomenal experiences and get a boost to your energy that is very unusual.
Right.
You can, and I think, and let me just backtrack just a little bit. That is not to say that none of the crop circles have been formed by ETs. The planet is communicating with all of the dimensions that exist, And so we are just in this little dimension, and we're not the only beings here. There are other beings, and they may be communicating with Mother Earth as well, but basically those crop circles are her chakras and her way of taking in information from the rest of the cosmos and giving off signals to the rest of the cosmos. And we, the human race, constitute a small part of the rest of that cosmos. And so we
but
witness...
Can they be like blueprints? Like if for example, we wanted to introduce a form of free energy into the consciousness of mankind, could we imprint the Earth with that blueprint into the field and allow it then to become manifested in 3D reality for human beings? Is that a possibility?
That's right. And I think, there's some of that going on. The Earth is very aware of what we need. And I think there have been some attempts on her part to communicate designs or, free energy formulas that we could use. Do we have difficulty interpreting that? Yes. Do we have, a system that would welcome that with open arms? Not really. Because the oil people, the oil dinosaurs are very much, they think they're very much in control. I think they're going down. But I think, I want to say one other thing about ETs as well. Everything that we can't explain or don't want to take responsibility for, we say the ETs did it. They did it. We did it. 90% of that is us. And we need to recognize that we are powerful beings and we're in communication with a planet and with other beings in other dimensions, and that we have multiple dimensional bodies, multidimensional bodies, that we live in and have experiences in all the time. And it's really, really important to stop, number one, blaming ETs for everything. Number two, attributing all of the powerful changes that may or may not be happening to ETs, and take responsibility for creating our world. It's very important that we do that.
And when you, in your book, you do speak about your own experiences and that you have had many amazing experiences for sure. You have had contact with what you call ETs or other energies, which we won't call human, from our planet and from other planets. Is that right?
Yeah, I use the term ETs or extraterrestrials or sometimes just other humanoids. And yeah, I've had a fair amount of experience, and some of it has been mind-boggling. And what I have learned from those experiences is that a whole bunch of the quote-unquote ET stories out there are not real. They're just projections of the Earthlings' ideas, and they don't take into account. They're just stories like Santa Claus and and Easter Bunny and stuff like that. If you have real experiences with other beings, even if there's only one experience, in that moment or moments or experience, you learn so much that it's, you could write a book just about what you learn about other dimensions of existence in that one encounter, because it's nothing like what we have here. It's nothing, and the mindsets and the way that they envision, nobody ever asks, what is the worldview of an ET? Because we're so self-centered, we can't even imagine that there's, another worldview other than ours. And we have to start asking questions like that. I heard somebody say recently, well, all the money that's disappeared in our government, I think they paid off the ETs, and I just burst out laughing. It's like, they don't need money. They don't need money, and they can't understand why we are so caught up with this idea of money and why we use it to create such inequality. So that's a good example of the projection that goes on by so many people. And there's a lot of what I'll call soap opera stories that are being touted as experience that are just, when you hear them, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. All right, they don't know. And it's kind of silly. It's
and
really time
do
to grow
you
up.
see now in our so-called near future that people will have a more expanded experience with other beings in our universe? Do you see that as something that's on the charts for us now at all?
I see that there's a lot of what I call cowboys and Indians or cops and robbers ideas about contact that are not really valid. I think there's contact going on because I have it myself.
Right.
But it is nothing like, and I've only found a couple people in the whole U.S. that their experiences match mine, and they have had the same impression, like, what is all this story crap out there? None of that matches our experience. And so it's like, okay, we could have a lot more contact, but we would have to change a lot, and we would have to grow up a lot, because a lot of ETs are not really interested in contact with us simply because we are so undisciplined, so uncontrolled, and so fearful. And therefore we react in an irrational manner, and they don't like that. They consider us to be maybe one hair above the animals. And so we would have to do a lot of things differently if we wanted to have contact.
And just to finish off, is there a way or a timeline or a possibility of you see humanity going higher than that one hair?
I see us going slowly upward. That's part of what I do. My whole thing, my whole reason for being here is to teach the world about the mind and consciousness and help develop that. And once you have experienced the next step up, Kundalini is a phenomenal boost in your energy and your consciousness. And it makes all kinds of things possible that are just not even on the chart when you haven't had Kundalini. And I think we could create machines that will boost the energy flow through a lot of bodies and make the clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, clairnascence, clairgustance, the out-of-body abilities, the healing abilities, just all kinds of stuff, the transport abilities, all that would become much more normal. We could boost people if we just have to make sure we didn't fry anybody. And Kundalini is dangerous.
Did you say we could use machines to raise Kundalini?
Yeah. And you could boost.
And what about not using machines? What about just doing it the natural, organic way that you have done it and that many others have done it? Is that too slow a method, or? That works fine. It's a little slower. I think there's probably certain drugs and certain substances that cause the mind to open. When consciousness awakens, you have unlimited consciousness. You're awake 24/7. There's no more sleep. You have to relearn how to sleep, and that may take several years. For me, it took almost 3 years. And read minds like
like you read a book. You have the ability to do stuff that you can hardly imagine. And you have to learn how to turn that stuff on and off if you want to be a rational member of today's society and fit in today's society. But you're never going to go back to being what you were. You're never going to, you're never going to be the same as once you're awake, you can't be unawake. And so I think, we have a lot of, I see us moving slowly. I've been through a lot of eras over the next 400 years. Just by 2050, there are astounding changes in the planet, in us, in our society, in our institutions, in our lifestyles. So that's 20, 30 years away. By 2080, it's even more amazingly developed. By 2413, it is just, it's like, OMG, this is a different...
And this is what you see with your consciousness as unfolding now, or through trips to
those were
times?
the things, those were the eras that the Little Men in Brown Robes took me to. There's another book that I don't think, we haven't talked about it, but at the time Kundalini happened, this group of little men in brown robes started appearing in my kitchen or my living room, and they wanted always one thing. They said, we have some pictures. Would you be willing to look at our pictures? And at first I kind of freaked out and said no, and then I was rude and wanted them to go away because so much was happening because of Kundalini. But eventually I thought, okay, when they kept coming back, I thought, okay, I'll look at their pictures and then they'll go away. And so what happened was that they returned, once I agreed to look at the pictures, they returned over the next, I'm going to say the next year, 2 years, year and a half maybe. And they showed me pictures of what was going to happen in our world and what we were evolving toward. And so I wrote all that up. Finally, they came back and they said, we want you to write that down. And I published that in 1997, maybe. And I didn't want to publish it, but that's another whole amazing story by itself. And it just took off. And it's got a lot of what I saw, amazing things that we have in store for us. Just, we are wonderful beings. We have incredible potentials. We have amazing powers that we haven't tapped. And we're moving toward those finally. And they, the little men in brown robes, the planet, all of Mother Nature, they want us to make that evolutionary step and not collapse and go back to being primitive.
And we make that evolutionary step by doing?
By developing ourselves, by developing consciousness. And, and it's a journey that is so interesting for each individual. Once you start it and you get a little taste of that, that will usually carry you. Sometimes people will get scared, but if there's, like I shepherd a lot of people because they get scared here and there. I teach a lot of people. And when they come out of those classes, they're different. And they're different forever. And they become real. It's like the story of the Velveteen Rabbit. I don't know if you've ever heard that story.
Oh, yes, I have a young child who we've loved that story very much.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's just a wonderful story, a wonderful journey of becoming who you really are, because true spirituality is the development of the true spirit of yourself, with all your wackiness and all of your passions and all of your, preferences and et cetera, et cetera. There's
it's
no
very,
standard.
very unique, very, very individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that becomes this very unique contribution to the reality system, and we need that. if we don't do that, the reality system will eventually implode on itself. It needs renewal. It needs new input, needs new ideas, needs changes. It needs all kinds of things. And we can't get caught in what I'm going to call a frozen scenario that doesn't serve the evolutionary purpose for which we have come here.
Or what I call the homogenization, where we're all doing the same thing and thinking the same way. Yeah, I think that the celebration of the individual is such an important part for me of our evolution. That we really are so unique and so very special in our own ways. Penny, thank you so much for sharing time with us, and I'm going to read another one of your books and ask for another interview. And just as we finish up, what if people are new to your work and they're learning about you now for the first time? I know you have many interviews, and people can go through your website and go through YouTube and find many hours of listening to Penny's wonderful voice. And if people are new to your work, what would you recommend as the first book that they read from you?
If they're new to personal development, then maybe start with the first book, The Evolving Human. If they are somewhat, been on the path, developing their own spirituality for a while, then I would suggest starting with Consciousness and Energy, Volume 1. If you got a health problem, maybe start with Getting Well Again Naturally. And, and what I tell people is follow your nose. You'll be drawn to one or another. But, as a sort of just off the top of my head, I would say beginners start with Evolving Human. If you're in it already, go to Consciousness and Energy, Volume 1.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And your website is pennykelly.com.
Yeah.
Yep. And I just want to put a little thing here at the end for us. Many years ago, when I was working in Budapest, I was actually involved with the Soros Foundation. I was working with George Soros, who is now quite an infamous figure in the world. And I was actually working as an art curator and was setting up art foundations there. And I was always very interested in Hinduism and spent a lot of time with the Hare Krishnas and the different communities that I was living in. And because of that, there was a very famous scholar that came to Budapest, and I was asked to translate for him, and this was probably the mid-90s, I think. And many people will know him today. His name is Michael Cremo, and forbidden archaeology, all sorts of very interesting things that he brought to the surface back then. And that was when I really I think, began to alter my view of reality, and on that level. And he always spoke about that we're not evolving as human beings, that this is actually, we have devolved into this state, that we are these very highly spiritual beings that we've devolved into this. So in the book that you call The Evolving Human Being, you actually do mean that we're devolved as well, right? Because I've heard you say many times that we are these brilliant, infinite sources of energy and godlike qualities. So do you also mean that as well, that we have devolved into this state?
Yeah, I do. That's exactly what I mean. In my last book, the one that I just put out last year, Consciousness and Energy, Volume 3, that is exactly what I take up. It's Volume 3 is subtitled History and Consciousness, and it's this realization, that I came to, that we had devolved terribly. And I began putting things together. I don't want to wreck the story, but it's exactly that whole devolution tragedy that has occurred. And I think we need to begin working our way back. And I think we can do it. I know we can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So, gosh.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I hope that we can also invite you to one of our upcoming conferences in New York in the next year, 2017. And again, thank you so much for all of your work and for sharing so much of your personal life with us and all of your incredible wisdom. And many, many blessings and much love to you from us at the Love Now movement. Thank you so much, Penny Kelly.
Thank you, Susie. I appreciate it. It was great. Great to be here.